I never thought I'd see my own funeral. Everyone, including my family, believed I was gone. The accident happened on a rainy night, a blur of screeching tires and shattered glass. The kind of accident that leaves you praying, hoping, and ultimately, surrendering to the fact that life can be cruel beyond measure. But somehow, against all odds, I survived. And not just survived. I came back to a world that had already moved on without me, a world where my name was whispered with grief, shock, and disbelief. I remember the moment clearly, the hospital room lit by harsh fluorescent lights, the sterile smell filling my nose, and the doctor's murmuring words I couldn't understand. My body hurt, yes, more than I ever imagined possible, but it was my heart that was breaking. Not because of the pain in my limbs, but because of the realization that everyone I loved thought I was dead. My parents had cried, my friends had mourned, and my uncle had vanished after the funeral, leaving nothing but cold silence behind. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. That night, the rain had been relentless. I had been driving home from work, tired but eager to see my little sister's smile. I never got the chance. A truck, speeding too fast, changed everything in an instant. The impact was so sudden that I barely remember hitting the windshield, only the sound of shattering glass, the smell of smoke, and the dizzying swirl of lights and pain. And then nothing. Weeks later, when I finally opened my eyes in that dimly lit hospital room, I realized that surviving wasn't the end of the nightmare, it was just the beginning. Because surviving meant facing the people who had already given up on me. Seeing their faces, their disbelief, their hesitation to even touch me, it was worse than the accident itself. And there was one person I hadn't seen yet, the person whose reaction would change everything. My uncle. He had always been a complicated figure in my life. Loving at times, controlling at others, always watching, always judging. The man who I thought had my back was the same man who had stood silent when the world thought I was gone. But life has a way of forcing the truth into the open. That day, in the sterile, cold environment of the lawyer's office, I walked in, not just as the survivor but as someone with answers, someone who had witnessed things no one else had, someone who carried evidence that could shatter family secrets. And there he was. My uncle, frozen in place, his face pale as he looked at me, a man he believed was gone forever. Time seemed to stop in that moment. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the panic beneath the surface, the calculation as he realized that my survival wasn't just a miracle, it was a threat to the life he thought he had under control. Everything changed in an instant. The words I had rehearsed for months caught in my throat. The truth I carried was heavy and I wasn't sure he was ready for it. But there was no turning back. This confrontation was inevitable. I sat down, trying to steady my breathing, the lawyer across the table unaware of the storm about to break. My uncle shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between me and the documents I held. He knew even before I spoke that something had changed. He had been counting on my absence, on the silence that followed my accident. But I wasn't silent anymore. And that's when it hit me, survival isn't just about living. It's about reclaiming the life that was stolen, facing the people who betrayed you, and daring to challenge the secrets that were buried under grief, lies, and fear. My uncle, the man I had trusted, would have to face me. The truth, no matter how uncomfortable, would finally come to light. But even as I prepared myself for the confrontation, a chilling realization crept over me. He wasn't just shocked, he was afraid. Afraid of what I knew, afraid of what I could reveal. And fear, I quickly learned, is more dangerous than any accident. I could feel it in the air, the tension, the unspoken words, the secrets threatening to explode at any moment. And in that moment, I knew my life was about to change again. Not because of the accident that almost killed me, but because of the secrets I had survived to uncover. I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. But I had no idea just how far the truth would reach, or what the consequences would be when the world realized I had returned from the dead. And that's where my story begins, not with the accident, not with the survival, but with the moment my uncle saw me, alive, standing across from him in the lawyer's office, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. Even as I sat there, staring at my uncle across the lawyer's polished desk, my mind kept replaying the months leading up to that day. The accident hadn't happened in isolation. It had been a culmination of so many small, seemingly insignificant moments I hadn't realized would change my life forever. My uncle had always been close to my family, but there had always been something beneath the surface, a tension I could never quite name. Something about the way he watched, the way he spoke in half-truths, the way he lingered a little too long when family matters were being discussed. I had ignored it as arrogance, as family quirks. Now, looking back, I realized I should have paid more attention. Before the accident, life had seemed so normal. I had my routines, my job, my friends, and the small comforts of home. But there had been signs I didn't notice, small cracks in the facade. Arguments whispered behind closed doors, phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room, and that constant feeling that someone was always observing. I hadn't understood it at the time, but hindsight is cruel like that. It shows you everything you missed, every warning you ignored, and then makes you face it all at once. I remembered the day before the accident, the day that now seemed like a lifetime ago. I had gone to the grocery store, stopped by the coffee shop I always went to, and laughed with a friend about a silly mistake at work. Life had felt ordinary, almost too ordinary. My uncle had called me that morning, asking me to check on some family documents. I didn't think much of it, but even then, there had been a tension in his voice, a subtle urgency I couldn't understand. Looking back, I could see now that it had been a warning, a signal of the chaos that was quietly building around me. The accident itself had been the breaking point, a single instant that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. But surviving it didn't solve the deeper problems, it exposed them. After weeks in the hospital, grappling with pain and disbelief, I returned to a world that had moved on without me. Friends who had grieved me now avoided me, unsure how to act around someone they had mourned. Neighbors whispered, some looking at me with pity, others with suspicion. And my family, well, my family had changed too. My parents were hesitant, distant, almost fearful, as if I were a stranger in my own home. And then there was my uncle. Before the lawyer's office confrontation, he had been the most elusive. Calls went unanswered, messages ignored. For a while, I wondered if he had really cared at all about me, or if my absence had been convenient. The more I thought about it, the more I realized he had always been a man who preferred control over compassion. He thrived when he could shape events around him, when outcomes bent to his will. And my survival? It shattered that control in ways I was only beginning to understand. The lawyer had been patient, trying to keep the meeting professional, but I could feel the tension thickening in the room. Every glance, every slight movement from my uncle was loaded with meaning. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hands fidgeting, his eyes narrowing as he looked at me. I tried to hide the growing storm inside me, but I knew he could sense it. He always sensed more than he let on, even when he pretended ignorance. And now, faced with the reality of my survival, that control he had taken for granted was slipping away, faster than he could comprehend. As the conversation began, I could see how carefully he weighed every word, how he measured every expression. He asked about my health, my recovery, even the accident itself, but there was a subtle edge to every question. Beneath the politeness, beneath the calm tone, was fear that I had returned not just as a survivor but as a witness to things he had tried to bury. And I had remembered details that others had forgotten, noticed things that no one else had seen, and I had proof of events that could unravel long-held secrets. I thought about the documents I carried with me that day, the files tucked safely in my bag, the ones no one expected me to have. They weren't just papers, they were pieces of the puzzle, pieces of a story no one had dared to tell. Every line, every note, every signature could change the way people saw my uncle, my family, and even me. And as I watched him squirm in that seat, I realized that survival was no longer about staying alive. It was about claiming the truth, even if it meant shaking the foundation of the people I had once trusted most. There were moments when our eyes met, and I could see him calculating, trying to predict my next move. I knew I had the upper hand in that room, but I also knew that he wasn't a man to be underestimated. Years of manipulation, subtle threats, and quiet intimidation had made him a force I couldn't ignore. And yet, for all his cunning, there was something about seeing me alive that shook him more than anything else ever could. The accident had not only taken me to the edge of death, it had also exposed vulnerabilities in the man I had once looked up to, vulnerabilities he never expected anyone to notice. I thought about how I had prepared for this moment, the long nights spent piecing together every detail, documenting every memory, every inconsistency, every suspicious action that had led to that fateful night. I knew I had to be careful, measured, yet firm. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a test of wills, a battle between truth and deception. And I had to make sure the truth won. And yet, even as I sat there ready to face him, I felt a chill of uncertainty. Survival had given me a second chance, yes, but it had also thrown me into a world filled with unknown dangers. Secrets that were meant to stay buried were now surfacing, and I had no idea how far-reaching their consequences might be. I had survived the accident, but what if I couldn't survive the storm that was about to follow? My uncle cleared his throat, his eyes flicking to the lawyer, then back to me. I didn't expect you to be here, he said, his voice tight, controlled, but with a tremor I couldn't miss. That single line, so simple on the surface, carried a weight of fear, suspicion, and something darker I couldn't name. I watched him carefully, noting every shift in his posture, every micro-expression. He was hiding something and I knew it. "I told you," I replied softly, letting the words hang in the air. "I survived. I remember everything. And I have questions you can't ignore." My voice was calm, but underneath, it carried the weight of months of pain, fear, and determination. This wasn't just about confronting him, it was about uncovering the truth even if it hurt, even if it shocked, even if it changed everything. He leaned back slightly, studying me, a predator measuring its prey. "Questions? About what?" he asked, though the hesitation in his tone betrayed him. He knew as well as I did that the questions were dangerous. They weren't about small details, they were about the accident, about secrets, about choices that had led to a night none of us would ever forget. And just like that, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. Every second stretched, every breath felt heavy, and I realized that what was about to happen would mark the beginning of a reckoning that neither of us could predict. My survival was only the first chapter. The real story, the one that would shake the people around me, reveal hidden truths, and expose long-kept lies, was just beginning. And in that moment I understood something profound. Surviving the accident wasn't enough. To truly live, I had to face the people who thought I was gone, confront the lies, and challenge the secrets that had almost taken my life. My uncle, for all his power and influence, had underestimated me. And I was ready to make him understand that nothing, not fear, not control, not even the passage of time, could keep the truth buried forever. Even as the lawyer shuffled papers and pretended to focus on trivial details, I could feel the storm brewing between me and my uncle. Every second in that office felt heavy, charged with unspoken words and long-buried tension. It wasn't just about the accident anymore, it was about everything that had led up to it, everything hidden behind polite smiles and family gatherings. I realized then that the accident had been a breaking point, not a random misfortune. Something in the way he reacted, the subtle hesitation in his voice, made me question how much he had actually known, and how much he had tried to control, even from the shadows. Outside, the rain tapped against the windows, a steady rhythm that mirrored my racing thoughts. I remembered the weeks after I left the hospital, when I had been too weak to confront anyone, too fragile to demand answers. I had spent that time piecing together fragments of conversations, scattered documents, and the eerie whispers of neighbors and friends who had known more than they said. Each revelation was like a small fracture in the facade of my family's life. A life that, from the outside, seemed perfect but was riddled with secrets. One memory kept replaying in my mind, the night before the accident when my uncle had unexpectedly come to my apartment. I had been tired, still recovering from a minor injury from a previous fall, and I remember how tense he looked, the way his eyes darted around the room as if he expected someone to be watching. He handed me a folder, and I noticed the contents were strangely detailed, almost obsessive, lists of people, payments, notes about conversations I didn't understand at the time. I had asked him what it was, but he just smiled, that careful, practiced smile of his, and said, "Nothing you need to worry about." That night, I had shrugged it off, thinking it was just family business, and went to bed. I never thought that folder held clues that would later reveal a web of manipulation that touched everyone I loved. Back in the lawyer's office, I saw him flinch slightly as I reached into my bag. I placed the folder on the table, sliding it gently toward him. The papers inside weren't just evidence. They were history, records of things hidden, decisions made, and actions taken that no one had dared question. I could see the weight of the folder on the table, symbolic of the burden of truth I was ready to bear. My uncle's eyes narrowed, the practiced calm slipping ever so slightly, revealing the tension I had anticipated. "I've been going over everything," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The accident, the days before, the decisions that were made, the people involved. I need to know why certain things happened and who had the most to gain." I didn't accuse, not yet. Accusation could be dangerous. I needed answers, and I needed to understand the full scope of what had unfolded while I was presumed dead. His silence was deafening. I could almost hear the gears turning behind his eyes, the careful calculation of what to say, what to hide, and how to maintain the illusion of control. But control had always been an illusion when the truth was on the table, and the folder was full of it. As I waited, I thought about my parents too. They had been grief-stricken after the accident, but now I wondered if their sorrow had been genuine or performative. The way they avoided eye contact, the way they whispered among themselves, it all seemed like a delicate balance between fear and denial. I had always trusted them, but now I wasn't sure. Trust, I realized, could be fragile, easily shattered when survival exposes things that were meant to remain hidden. And then there were the friends who had vanished, the ones who had sent flowers and condolences but never checked in after I returned. Their absence gnawed at me, a reminder that survival isn't just about living through an accident. It's about navigating the world after, when people you thought you could rely on disappear, revealing their true priorities. My uncle finally spoke, his voice low, careful. "You don't understand, there were reasons. Things you weren't supposed to know. I thought you were gone. I thought it would be easier this way." His words trembled with a mixture of regret and fear, but they were far from complete. What he hadn't said was louder than what he had. There were actions taken, secrets protected, and consequences that hadn't been revealed yet. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes locking with his. "It's not easier now," I said softly, "and I need the truth. I survived for a reason. You can't control this anymore, and I need to know what really happened." My voice carried both calm determination and the undercurrent of anger I had held inside for months. The anger wasn't just about the accident, it was about the lies, the betrayals, and the silence that had surrounded me while I was presumed dead. The tension in the room shifted again. My uncle's fingers tapped nervously on the table, a subtle sign that the power dynamic had changed. For years, he had relied on people not asking questions, on fear and manipulation keeping others in line. But now I was asking questions, and the storm I had survived wasn't just inside me, it was about to spill into the lives of everyone who had underestimated me. As the conversation continued, I realized there were multiple layers to the conflict. It wasn't just between me and my uncle. There were other players, people whose names I had never heard, whose decisions had influenced events leading to that night. The deeper I delved, the more I understood how interconnected the situation had become. One small choice, one hidden truth, could unravel everything. And yet, even as I pieced together these fragments, I felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. What had started as an accident was now clearly entangled with motives, intentions, and actions that went far beyond a simple tragedy. The questions multiplied with every answer I uncovered, and I began to understand that survival had placed me at the center of something far more dangerous than I could have imagined. My uncle's gaze shifted, wary now, almost like a cornered animal. He had underestimated my resilience, my memory, and my determination. But I also realized he wasn't the only one hiding things. The lawyer, for all her professionalism, seemed uneasy, her eyes flicking to the folder, then to me, then back to him. The room was filled with silent tension, a web of secrets waiting for someone to pull the threads. I thought about how different perspectives would change the story. To my uncle, I was a threat. To my parents, perhaps a reminder of guilt. To friends, an inconvenient truth. And to me, I was finally beginning to see the outlines of the world I had been forced back into. The world where survival wasn't enough unless you were willing to confront the lies, the betrayals, and the hidden dangers lurking just beneath the surface. I could feel the room tighten around me, the rain outside hammering against the windows, each drop echoing like a reminder of what had been lost and what was still at stake. Every moment was a choice, every word a potential revelation. And as I looked at my uncle, I knew that the confrontation had only just begun. The truth was close, but so were the consequences, and I had no idea just how far-reaching they would be. And then, almost as if sensing my thoughts, he leaned forward slightly, his eyes sharp, his voice low and cautious. "You weren't supposed to remember, not like this. There are things you don't understand, things that could destroy more than just our family." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication, leaving me to wonder what secrets he had been protecting all along, and whether I was truly prepared to face them. "Without resolving the major conflicts yet. Do you want me to continue in that direction?" you said. The room felt smaller now, tighter, as if the air itself were holding its breath. Every tick of the clock on the wall sounded like a drumbeat, counting down to a confrontation that neither of us could avoid. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a steady rhythm that reminded me I was alive, and that survival had brought me here for a reason. My uncle's eyes were sharp, darting nervously, and yet there was a part of him that wanted to remain calm, to maintain control. But control had always been fragile when confronted with the truth, and the longer we sat there, the more I could see his carefully maintained facade begin to crack. I thought about how much had changed since the accident. I had returned to a world that assumed I was gone, and in my absence, people had made choices they wouldn't have made if I had been there. Some were small, selfish decisions. Others were bigger, more dangerous. The accident had been the perfect cover for secrets, for betrayals, for actions that might never have been questioned. And now I was back, and the past I had thought was buried was clawing its way to the surface. The lawyer cleared her throat, trying to keep the conversation professional, but I knew she could feel the tension just as acutely as I did. Her pen hovered over a notebook, waiting, but there was no need for words. The atmosphere in the room was electric, a storm ready to break. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes never leaving my uncle's. "I need to know everything," I said quietly but firmly. Everything that led to that night. Who knew what, and who had the most to gain from my being gone. His reaction was subtle at first, a slight stiffening of his shoulders, a tightening around his jaw, but then it came, the flicker of fear in his eyes that he could not hide. He had always been composed, always a man who calculated his words, but now, confronted with my survival and my determination, the cracks were showing. And I could sense it, he was afraid. Not just afraid of me, but of what my knowledge could do, of how the truth might unravel the life he had tried so carefully to control. I thought about the folder again, the one that contained the fragments of a story no one had dared speak aloud. Each page, each note, each signature held power, the power to expose, to confront, to shake the foundations of the people who had thought they could move on without me. Sliding it across the table toward him, I watched as his hands hovered, unsure whether to touch it. The weight of those papers was nothing compared to the weight of the truth they contained. "You were never supposed to see this," he said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You don't understand the danger. Some things are better left buried." His words trembled slightly, betraying the calm he tried to maintain. I could see it in the way his fingers tapped nervously on the edge of the table, in the slight tightening of his lips, in the subtle twitch of his eyes. Every movement told me more than he would ever say aloud. I felt a cold realization settle over me. Survival had brought me here, but survival alone wasn't enough. The danger wasn't behind me, it was all around me. Every secret, every hidden action, every person who had played a role in that night was still out there, waiting, watching, perhaps preparing. And now, I was part of a story far larger than the accident itself. A story that had consequences no one could fully predict. I thought of my parents, their hesitant glances, their careful words when I returned home. Had they truly mourned me, or had they been trapped in a web of fear and secrecy, afraid of what would come if the truth was revealed? I thought of friends who had disappeared, of neighbors whose whispers hinted at knowledge they weren't brave enough to share. And now, confronted with my return, my survival, my questions, everything was converging on this moment, in this small office, with my uncle caught between fear, pride, and desperation. He leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing, his fingers curling into fists beneath the table. "There are things you don't remember," he said carefully, each word deliberate. "Things that night, things that no one survived seeing clearly. And even now, some truths could destroy more than you realize." His gaze sharpened, as if warning me not to push further, not yet. But I had no choice. The storm had begun, and there was no turning back. I remembered flashes of that night, the rain, the screeching tires, the headlights blinding me, the impact. Bits and pieces, fragments that refused to form a full picture. And I knew that what I didn't remember was just as important as what I did. The accident had been more than an accident. It had been a catalyst, an event that set things in motion, things that had been hidden in plain sight, carefully orchestrated by someone I had once trusted. And now the pieces were starting to fall into place, but not fully, not yet. The tension in the room grew almost unbearable. I could feel the weight of every unspoken word pressing down on us. Every glance between us was loaded, every pause a moment of silent calculation. I could see my uncle's mind working frantically, weighing options, considering consequences, trying to anticipate my next move. But I was learning something about him I hadn't known before. Fear could make even the most composed people vulnerable, and now, fear was his constant companion. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself, to prepare for the confrontation that was approaching its peak. Survival had been just the beginning. I had returned for answers, for truth, and for justice in my own way. But I could feel that the answers I sought were dangerous, that every revelation could shift the balance, and that the consequences of uncovering the full story might reach further than I was ready to face. And then, almost imperceptibly, a change came over him. His eyes darted to the window, to the street below, as if weighing whether someone else was watching, whether he had underestimated the stakes. He was no longer just my uncle in that moment. He was a man cornered by the consequences of his actions, caught in a web that had grown far beyond his control. I realized, with a chill in my chest, that the climax of this confrontation was imminent. The answers, the truths, the long-hidden secrets, they were all about to surface. And once they did, nothing would ever be the same. The rain outside intensified, beating against the windows like a warning. I could feel the storm mirrored inside the room, the tension so thick it felt almost tangible. Every second stretched, every breath carried the weight of anticipation. I knew that what was coming next would define everything. The past, the present, and the uncertain future that had been waiting for me while I was presumed dead. And just as I was about to speak again to push the moment further, my uncle's hand shot toward the folder, fingers trembling slightly. His eyes locked on mine, sharp, calculating, but betraying something he could not fully hide: fear, desperation, and perhaps a flicker of guilt. The storm had begun. The confrontation that would change everything was on the edge of breaking. And in that instant, I understood that the most intense moments of my life were about to arrive, moments that would leave no one untouched, no secret buried, and no relationship untouched by the truths about to unfold. Just as my uncle's fingers brushed against the folder, a sharp knock at the office door made both of us startle. The lawyer glanced up, clearly annoyed, but there was something in the knock that felt deliberate. My uncle stiffened, his hand freezing midair, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Whoever it was, they knew this moment was critical. Whoever it was, they knew that the truths hidden in that folder were more dangerous than anyone could imagine. The door opened slowly and a man I didn't recognize stepped in. He was tall, sharply dressed, with a calm but unreadable expression. "I believe you have something that belongs to me," he said, his voice smooth but carrying an edge of authority. My uncle paled slightly, his hand retreating from the folder as if it had burned him. I froze, unsure how this new presence would affect the fragile tension in the room. I quickly realized that this wasn't just another visitor. The man had information, power, and a motive that none of us had anticipated. He was connected to the accident in ways I couldn't yet comprehend, and his sudden appearance shifted the stakes entirely. What I had assumed was a family matter, a confrontation about secrets and survival, was now part of a far larger web of manipulation and hidden agendas. My uncle opened his mouth, stammering, This isn't," but the man cut him off. "No explanations. Just the truth. And I suggest you hand it over before things get complicated." His gaze fell on me, and in that moment, I understood that he wasn't just interested in the folder itself, he was interested in the consequences it held. The folder suddenly felt heavier, the weight of everything I had survived pressing down on me. Months of piecing together memories, documents, and whispers had brought me here, but now, a new variable had been introduced. Someone else was controlling part of this story, someone with the power to shift the balance entirely. And I realized that surviving the accident had only been the beginning. The real danger had only just arrived. I looked at my uncle, who now seemed cornered in a way I had never seen before. His carefully maintained composure had crumbled, replaced by a mix of fear, anger, and desperation. You weren't supposed to be involved," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. But I could hear the panic in his voice, the recognition that everything he thought was under control was unraveling before his eyes. The man stepped closer to the table, his eyes scanning the folder. "Do you know what's in here?" he asked, his tone almost casual, but there was a threat woven into every word. "Do you understand what could happen if this information gets out?" His gaze shifted to me, and suddenly I realized that the survival I had fought for, the life I had clawed back, was now tangled in something far more dangerous than I could have imagined. The tension in the room became almost unbearable. The rain outside had turned into a downpour, hammering the windows like an omen, a reflection of the storm inside. Every heartbeat felt amplified, every glance charged with fear, suspicion, and anticipation. I knew that the decisions made in the next moments would determine everything: who would gain control, who would be exposed, and how far-reaching the consequences would be. My uncle's voice shook slightly as he finally addressed the man. "You don't understand. This isn't just a folder. It's connected to things you weren't meant to know. Things that—" He stopped abruptly, his words dying in the air. I could sense his hesitation, the unspoken admission that some secrets were far darker than anyone had imagined. I felt a surge of determination. I had survived the accident, survived months of uncertainty, and now I was facing a new threat, a new twist that could have turned my world upside down. But for the first time, I realized that fear alone would not dictate my actions. Survival had taught me resilience, and resilience had taught me the power of uncovering the truth, no matter how dangerous. The man's gaze remained fixed on the folder. "I suggest you make the right choice," he said quietly, almost like a warning whispered in the eye of the storm. "The longer you hesitate, the more irreversible the consequences become." His words hung in the air, a promise and a threat intertwined, making it clear that the stakes were higher than any of us had imagined. I glanced at my uncle again. He was trapped, not just by my presence but by the consequences of his own actions, by the choices that had led to the accident and everything that followed. And I realized that the accident was never just a moment of misfortune. It had been a catalyst, a spark that ignited a chain reaction that none of us could control. I could feel my pulse quicken as I weighed my next move. Handing over the folder would protect some, but it would expose others. Keeping it would risk confrontation with someone far more dangerous than my uncle. And then it hit me, survival alone was no longer enough. To truly reclaim my life, I had to navigate this storm carefully, to outmaneuver the hidden threats, and to confront the people who had underestimated me for far too long. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the glass in a rhythm that matched the tension inside. Every second stretched, every breath carried the weight of what could come next. I knew that the truth in the folder could change everything, expose betrayals, uncover hidden motives, and reveal secrets that had been buried for too long. And I also knew that revealing it would make enemies, challenge loyalties, and push every relationship to the breaking point. I looked back at my uncle, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. And then I turned to the man, whose presence now made everything uncertain. One glance told me everything I needed to know. The stakes had been raised, the conflict had escalated, and nothing would ever be the same once the next move was made. I reached for the folder, feeling the weight of months of survival, months of memory, and months of preparation in my hands. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside, the collision of secrets, lies, and truths that were about to explode. And as I opened the folder, my eyes fell on a page that made my blood run cold. Someone had been watching, someone had orchestrated events far beyond what I had realized, and the second twist of the story was about to change everything. And in that moment, I understood fully, surviving the accident had been just the beginning. The real danger, the real conflict, and the real reckoning were only just beginning. Everything I had believed, everything I had survived, was about to collide with a truth I wasn't yet ready to face, but I had no choice. The next steps would determine not just my life, but the lives of everyone who had thought they could hide from the consequences of that night. The air in the office was electric, thick with tension, as if the storm outside had seeped inside, wrapping everything in a suffocating grip. I opened the folder fully, revealing the pages that had driven months of unease, sleepless nights, and careful investigation. My eyes scanned the documents, each one a fragment of truth that tied together the accident, the secrecy, and the hidden motives that had haunted me since that night. The man standing before me stiffened, realizing that the web he had carefully woven was being unraveled, thread by thread. "I know what you did," I said, my voice steady, each word deliberate, carrying the weight of survival, of betrayal, of every moment I had spent piecing this together. "The accident wasn't an accident at all. You manipulated it and you tried to make it look like I never came back. But I survived. And now the truth is here." My eyes locked with my uncle's, and I could see every flicker of fear, guilt, and realization in his face. He swallowed hard, trying to maintain composure, but I could see it slipping. It wasn't supposed to," he started, then faltered. The man who had entered earlier, the stranger connected to the accident in ways I was only now beginning to understand, stepped closer. His eyes were sharp, almost cold, but there was a hint of respect, or maybe acknowledgement, that the situation had reached its breaking point. "You've uncovered more than anyone expected," he said quietly, almost like a warning. "Some of these secrets, they can't be undone. But the world deserves the truth." I flipped through more pages, evidence of bribes, hidden transactions, and manipulations that had been orchestrated in the shadows. It became clear, the accident had been used as a tool, a cover for schemes that stretched far beyond my understanding at the time. The people I trusted, the people I had loved, had been entangled in something far bigger than I had imagined. And yet, despite it all, I had survived, not just physically but mentally, emotionally, and now strategically. "You thought my absence would make everything easier," I said, addressing my uncle directly. "You thought you could control the narrative, manipulate the story, and silence me. But survival isn't just living. It's claiming the truth no matter how dangerous." My hand hovered over the folder, a tangible symbol of power, justice, and reckoning. The climax hit fully as he leaned back in his chair, eyes wide, realizing that the truth could no longer be hidden. "You don't understand, if this comes out, everything could collapse. Families, businesses, people's lives." His voice faltered, showing the cracks that months of control and manipulation could never hide from someone determined to see clearly. "I do understand," I said calmly, "and that's why I'm here. To make sure that what happened to me and what was almost hidden forever, doesn't get buried again." Every word struck like a hammer, shattering the illusion of control he had tried to maintain. The man from earlier nodded subtly, as if to confirm that the balance had shifted entirely. Then came the twist, the final blow that no one saw coming. As I looked through the last pages, I realized something astonishing. Someone close to me, someone I had trusted implicitly, had been feeding information to the orchestrators of the accident all along. My parents, the people I had thought were innocent and grieving, had known more than they had let on. The evidence revealed subtle instructions, hidden meetings, and silent compliance that had allowed events to unfold the way they did. My survival wasn't just a shock to them, it was a threat that had finally exposed them too. My eyes met theirs across the room and I saw the guilt, the fear, and the helplessness. The person who had seemed my protector was now caught in the storm I had survived to face. It wasn't just about my uncle anymore, it was about everyone who had underestimated the consequences of keeping secrets, about everyone whose choices had endangered me and hidden the truth. The room was silent for a long moment, broken only by the rain pounding against the windows. I realized that my survival had been a turning point not just for me but for all of them. The accident, the manipulations, the months of fear and uncertainty, they all led to this instant, a reckoning that would redefine relationships, expose betrayals, and force long-hidden truths into the open. "You were supposed to be gone," I said, voice steady but heavy, "but I'm here. And now the lies end." My uncle, my parents, even the stranger, everyone understood that the next moments would determine the outcome of years of deception. There was no hiding anymore. Survival had brought me here, but truth would carry me forward. And just when it seemed that the storm had peaked, the final twist hit. A text appeared on my phone. I glanced at it, my stomach dropping. It was a single message, no name attached. "They know you're alive. And now they're coming for you." The room froze. The rain outside felt louder, harsher, as though the storm itself had become a warning. Survival had brought me back, truth had exposed the betrayals, but now there was something more. Something unseen, something dangerous, ready to strike. And for the first time I realized that the real fight, the fight for my life, for justice, for control of the story, was only beginning. The climax had arrived. Secrets were revealed, betrayals exposed, and the balance of power had shifted. Yet even in victory, uncertainty lingered. The unexpected twist reminded me that survival was never simple, that truth could be a weapon, and that sometimes the real danger comes not from what you know, but from what's still hidden in the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. If you want, I can also create a YouTube-ready full-script version, combining the introduction, build-up. The tension in the office didn't lift immediately after the final revelation. Everyone, my uncle, my parents, even the stranger, sat in stunned silence, each processing the consequences of the truths I had laid bare. I closed the folder slowly, feeling its weight still heavy in my hands, but lighter than the burden of uncertainty and fear that had haunted me since the accident. I had survived, yes, but more importantly, I had reclaimed control over a story that had been hijacked by secrecy, lies, and manipulation. My uncle leaned back in his chair, pale and defeated, a man who had tried to control everything, finally realizing that the power he thought he held was an illusion. I never meant for it to go that far," he said quietly, a confession more to himself than to anyone else. I nodded, understanding that guilt was a complex thing. It could haunt, torment, and sometimes lead to redemption, if only a person was willing to face it. "But you survived. You're alive. And that's what matters." I looked at my parents, whose faces were lined with fear, shame, and a flicker of relief. They had been complicit in their own ways, caught in circumstances they hadn't fully controlled, but seeing me alive forced them to confront what had been hidden for far too long. Tears welled up in their eyes as they struggled to find words. I wanted to forgive them, not immediately but eventually, as part of the healing that was only beginning. "I'm here now," I said softly, "and we need to move forward. But things can't go back to the way they were. We have to be honest, all of us." The stranger, who had been the catalyst for the second twist of this story, nodded slightly. He was no enemy, but a reminder that actions have consequences far beyond what anyone anticipates. "The information you uncovered is powerful," he said, his voice steady. "It can protect people or it can destroy them. Use it wisely. What you do next will define everything." His words lingered, a sobering reminder that the survival I had fought for was only one part of the journey. I thought back to the accident itself, the night that had changed everything. The rain, the screeching tires, the sudden chaos. It had been a moment that nearly ended my life, yet it had also been the turning point. In surviving, I had uncovered secrets, faced betrayal, and realized that strength doesn't come from avoiding pain but from confronting it, from demanding the truth even when it's uncomfortable or dangerous. The accident had almost taken me, but it had also forged me into someone capable of navigating the shadows that others feared to enter. Over the next few hours we talked. Not just about the accident but about the decisions that had led to it, about the secrets kept, and about the future that we could now try to rebuild. My uncle admitted the depth of his misjudgments, my parents confessed to the omissions and complicity that had endangered me, and the stranger helped clarify the larger web of motives that had remained hidden until now. Every word peeled back layers of deception, and though the truth was painful, it was liberating. I realized that closure wasn't instant. It wasn't a single dramatic reveal or a confrontation. It was gradual, built from conversations, honesty, and a willingness to acknowledge mistakes. And as the rain outside began to lighten, as if signaling the end of the storm, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Survival had given me life, but reclaiming the truth gave me purpose. I wasn't just living, I was reclaiming a life that had almost been stolen, and in doing so, I had taken the first step toward healing. The subplots that had woven through this story, the betrayals, the hidden agendas, the disappearance of friends and allies, began to find resolution too. People who had seemed absent or indifferent were revealed to be acting from fear, not malice. Those who had made mistakes now faced the opportunity to make amends. Even my uncle, once a figure of fear and control, began to show a willingness to change, to take responsibility, and to participate in rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. I looked around the room one last time. The storm outside had passed completely, the sun breaking through clouds, reflecting off wet streets with a clarity that seemed symbolic of what we had just experienced. The folder lay closed, the truths it contained no longer hidden, and though the consequences would ripple outward in ways we couldn't yet predict, the first step had been taken. I had survived. I had uncovered the truth. And I had forced everyone around me to confront reality, just as I had been forced to confront my own survival. As we left the office, the city felt different. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I walked with a sense of purpose, knowing that my life was no longer just a story of survival but a story of resilience, courage, and reclaiming what was rightfully mine. And I knew that, moving forward, every choice I made would be informed by the lessons of the past, the importance of truth, the consequences of secrecy, and the power of confronting fear head-on. The final twist lingered in my mind, the warning from the stranger that there were still shadows beyond the immediate revelations. Someone had known about my survival before I even did, and while the immediate danger had passed, the world was far from safe. But I felt ready. Survival had taught me patience, awareness, and strategy. The future was uncertain, yes, but I had reclaimed control over my story and nothing could take that away from me. Reflecting on everything, I realized that life doesn't offer guarantees. Accidents, betrayals, and secrets can threaten to destroy us, but survival isn't just about avoiding the end, it's about reclaiming agency, facing consequences, and forging a path forward despite the pain. The story of my accident, my return, and the confrontations that followed had taught me that truth is a weapon and a shield, that courage isn't the absence of fear, and that even when the world seems determined to move on without you, you can still claim your place in it. As I stepped out into the sunlight, I felt a sense of closure, not total closure but enough to move forward. Questions had been answered, subplots had resolved, and the main conflicts had found their resolution. Yet life remained unpredictable, and the shadows that had once seemed insurmountable were now challenges I was prepared to face. The accident that had almost ended me had instead revealed the strength within me, the resilience I hadn't known I possessed, and the clarity that comes from surviving and confronting the truths others try to hide. And with that, I finally understood what it truly meant to be alive. Not just to breathe, not just to exist, but to survive, confront, and reclaim a life shaped by courage, truth, and unwavering determination. The storm had passed, but the lessons would stay with me forever. I had survived the accident everyone believed killed me. I had faced my uncle, uncovered betrayal, and exposed secrets that had been buried too long. And as I walked away, I knew this was more than a story of survival. It was a story of strength, resilience, and the power of truth.